Every year, millions of people travel hundreds of miles all over North America just to go to truck shows. But it's not the brand new trucks they're going to see, it's the big classic long hood trucks. This video is generously sponsored by GP Transco. But these classic trucks that you now travel hundreds of miles to go see at truck shows, it used to be that you could just go down to the interstate and just watch them going by, and they were going by all the time. But they're slowly disappearing from our interstates. You can't see them working anymore, and it's all because of greed. Big greed by the oil companies, by the government, and by manufacturing. And that greed is driving the long hood trucks into extinction. While the trucks of the 60s were pretty rough old girls to drive, by the 70s, trucking companies, trucking manufacturers, like PACCAR for instance, had begun to focus more on driver comfort. And they started making bigger, more comfortable beds, and they introduced air ride suspensions. And in the 70s, trucks became a whole lot more comfortable to drive. Now in the 70s too, the interstates were well on their way to completion. But the nation was already connected all over the place by two-lane highways and roads, and manufacturers wanted to move their goods. Produce growers in California wanted to be able to sell their produce to markets in Chicago and New York City. Lumber mills up in the Northwest wanted to be able to sell their lumber to building manufacturing companies in Memphis and Los Angeles. Everybody wanted to move their freight. Meat manufacturers in Wyoming wanted to be able to get their product to market in Chicago and Memphis. And every North American red-blooded boy wanted to be able to drive one of these big long hood trucks because it was just the best job in the world back then. It was a great way to see the country. You got to ride one of these big powerful beasts and you got paid for it. Now in the 70s, when I first started trucking, I was pinning up to trailers that were 40 feet long. And back then there were no short haul little intermediate sized trucks to deliver stuff. You had to be able to get the semis right into all the places that you had to go. And 40 feet, that was a maneuverable trailer, even with a big long hood truck. Now, when the early 80s came along, my first reefer was a 42 foot, but it was still 96-inch wide. The engineering had improved, it had sliding axles, and still, that trailer was easy to get into all sorts of tight spots. But I began to notice in the late 80s that all of a sudden, trailers were starting to get bigger and bigger every year. And it started with the auto manufacturers. They demanded the government allow them to have bigger trailers so they could haul more auto parts to these auto plants. So the auto manufacturers, the big ones like GM, basically forced the government into licensing them bigger trailers to haul. Well then when the automotive industry got that, well then the grocery industry looked at that and went, well, if they can have it, we should be able to have it too. So they lobbied for bigger trailers, and soon the trailers just were growing and growing and growing, and everybody wanted the big trailers. The trailers not only got longer, they got wider too. They went from 96 inches wide to 102 wide. And all of a sudden they were grabbing more air, and these longer trailers were costing us more fuel. We were burning more fuel, and everybody was happy because the manufacturers were moving more product. The government saw their fuel tax revenues increasing just because we were losing fuel mileage and paying more for fuel. And the oil companies went, there's a huge demand for our oil. We need to up our pump prices so we can put more into research and drilling and manufacturing refineries. And the cost of everything started to go up. But the downside of that was the truckers got caught in the void. So this became a cyclical thing. The price of fuel was going up, everything was going up, and the truckers were caught in the position that all of a sudden they were being forced to change because suddenly the trailers were so long now that they couldn't get them in just everywhere. So what was the solution? Everybody had to have the bigger trailers, but you couldn't get them in anywhere. The trucks had to start shrinking, and shrinking they did. And all of a sudden, driver comfort and everything else went in the toilet just to make the manufacturers happy, and the big carriers like the jelly bean trucks because they got better fuel mileage. But again, the truckers were the losers in this deal, and that's when you started to see the big hoods starting to disappear from the industry, and the drop-nose jelly bean trucks became the trucks to have. Part of what we do here at Smart Trucking is to help truck drivers find the best trucking companies and the best jobs available. So we search out the top companies. And one of the top companies, one that we really like, is GP Transco. They're a top place for company drivers to work. They've got top wages, top benefits, a 401k, and a transparent dispatch system. They're honest, good people. Check them out at gptransco.com. So this whole cyclical industry now has gotten to the point where the fuel is so expensive, you can't even afford to fuel the little trucks now that they manufacture today. Drivers don't want to drive the little trucks. Fuel is through the roof, and the supply chain has started to shut down because nothing is moving. The government and big oil and big manufacturing have messed with a system, an entire trucking industry that was working really well in the 70s and all of a sudden has been squeezed so badly from all different directions that now we have the industry today that is suffering from problems because nothing is moving. There's an old saying that goes, if something ain't broke, don't mess with it. But government, big manufacturing, and big oil has messed with a system that was working just beautifully. And now millions of people still go to see these long hood trucks at the truck shows, but sadly, you can't hardly ever see them working on the interstates anymore. It's truly a tragedy that all this meddling by the government and by manufacturing and by big oil has made really nice trucks like this virtually obsolete. They've changed the trucks in the industry now that fuel is over $6 a gallon in a lot of places, and you can't afford to drive any of the trucks anyway now. And now they're looking at electric trucks as a patchwork solution. The whole thing's been a disaster, and you can thank the politicians for that. Stay safe, keep the rubber side down. Let me know in the comments if you're going to miss these big, classic long hood American trucks the way I am. I'll see you on the backhaul.